Вітаю, шановні слухачі подкастів DIF Dive від фонду «Демократичні ініціативи імені Ілька Кучерєва». У цьому форматі аналітики та експерти коментують та аналізують тенденції, виклики та загрози суспільно-політичного життя в Україні та світі. При мікрофоні Ксенія Кутова, комунікаційниця Демініціатив. Тож давайте розпочинати. Сьогоднішній епізод подкасту DIF Dive буде трохи незвичним, але сподіваємось від того не менш цікавим. У цьому епізоді ви послухаєте закордонного військового експерта. Заінтригували? Тож розповідаємо далі, що й до чого. 14 липня за сприяння фонду «Демократичні ініціативи імені Ілька Кучерєва» відбулася публічна розмова з професором військових досліджень, головою відділу стратегічних досліджень в Арабському центрі досліджень і політичних студій Дохійського університету, що в Катарі, та автором книги «Як воює іділ» Омаром Ашуром. Ще трохи інформації про спікера, щоб ви побачили, що людина дійсно серйозна, та її є про що послухати. Отже, коротка довідка про спікера. Омар Ашур здобув ступінь доктора наук в університеті МcGill в Канаді, ступінь бакалавра та магістра в Американському університеті в Каїрі. Раніше професор Ашур викладав в університеті Екстера в Великобританії та в університеті МcGill в Канаді. Також працював старшим консультантом ООН з питань реформи сектору безпеки, боротьби з тероризмом і дерадикалізації. Окрім цього, був автором документа Економічної та соціальної комісії ООН для Західної Азії про реформу сектору безпеки під час перехідних періодів арабської весни. Автор низки статей і праць про військову та бойову ефективність, оборону малих держав, асиметричну війну, повстання та боротьбу з повстанцями, демократизацію з акцентом на реформу сектора безпеки та цивільно-військові відносини, безпеку та тероризм. Тобто зараз, під час російсько-української війни, його знання є особливо цінними та актуальними для нас. Тож давайте переходити безпосередньо до теми.
I started this project in 2016, and the project was really about how the weak side fights. So if you're outnumbered, if you're outgunned, if you're fighting in a geography that is not helpful for you, if you don't have state sponsorship, if the local support is not very high, so basically the macro conditions, the structural conditions are not for you, some state and non-state actors challenged that and made a win, made a victory. Sometimes it's operational victory, so victory on just an operation, and sometimes it's even a strategic victory. So how did that happen? The most extreme case that I found, the case that is so far away from everything else, was ISIS, was the non-state actors. But the project started with 5 states and 5 non-states. And I was looking always at the weaker side that was attacked, was ambushed, and then managed to fight back. Ukraine was the first state case. And that was specifically for the 2014 summer counteroffensive that was led by some of the very high-level Ukrainian brigades like the 95th Air Assault, the 25th Air Assault, the 25th Airborne, and the 93rd Mechanized, who pushed back Russian-led forces in the summer of 2014 and liberated many of the towns that we speak about today, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Mariupol, and also the volunteer battalions that Petro wrote a great piece about recently. So I was looking at that, but I did not continue that project. I visited Ukraine. I spoke to some colleagues, friends, and this is when Ukraine became more and more personal story, because many of them, actually 11 of them, died while fighting the Russian invasion. This is 11 out of 14. The 3 others were also wounded. So Ukraine became more and more of a personal story, and I say this in details in the prologue of that book. But then I moved forward to another case, which was the most difficult case, because it's very difficult to... Ukraine is a legitimate state with legitimate armed forces. ISIS is not. So getting data on ISIS was very difficult. Especially, it was illegal to talk to the members, but legal to talk to the ones who fought against them. And then you understand how they fight that way. And that produced the book. There was another story about this book, another personal story about this book, which started back during the Arab Spring. Are you guys familiar with the term Arab Spring? It's like the series of pro-democracy revolutions that happened in the Arab world, hoping to remove dictatorship and become. And back then I was walking down in Cairo towards Tahrir Square, and a friend of mine sent me a video from Syria. And the video was a tactic used by a small organization. Back then it's called Jabhat al-Nusra Front back then. And the tactics was quite interesting. You had a command post. You're familiar with that? We target them all the time with storm shadows here. And the command post had several obstacles around it. I'm going to show it in a second in the PowerPoint. And the Free Syrian Army, which is the conventional armed opposition, was trying to get to that command post for a while in Aleppo and failing to do so. And then suddenly that small group lined up 5 cars, 5 small vehicles, Toyotas, and behind them a big truck. The first car took out the first obstacle, made a hole in it. Second car made a hole in the second obstacle. Third and fourth car made holes in the obstacles. These are like cement barriers. They made holes in them because they were cars full of explosives, and there were people driving. So it was a suicide. We call them SVIDs. So suicide vehicle-borne IEDs, improvised explosive devices. And then they made a way basically for the truck. The truck entered and took down the building. The truck was a 5-ton truck with lots of explosives. Took down the building. The command post was down, and then a group of small units came out to clean the area and made sure basically that they decapitated the leadership of that command post back then. And the whole thing took about less than 2 to 3 minutes. So 2 weeks of attacks by the Free Syrian Army, nothing happened, and then this group comes and finishes it like that. That group was born out of ISI, the organization that preceded ISIS in Iraq. It was called the Islamic State in Iraq, or ISI, and then later on became ISIS. So then I was looking at that and I'm thinking, this is not even a strategy. This is like, you cannot even call it an operational level of war. That's merely a tactic. But that tactic was so effective that it will have strategic implications. So if you read Sun Tzu, The Art of War, Sun Tzu will tell you, tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Sun Tzu is wrong. I'm sorry to say. That was a tactic, and they had no strategy. They had no idea how to attain a strategic victory. And it was much more than noise before defeat, because they actually had at one point 50% of Syria's territories. 50% of Syrian territories. While I'm going to say the story, there were foreigners. Most of them were foreigners. They were not even from Syria. Nobody liked them. So they were fighting both the regime and the opposition. The geography was not for them unless you enter the city and you make your own geography in the city. So you use the buildings, you use the tunnels, you make your own cover concealment within the city. The geography is not supportive, and they had no state sponsorship. Both the opposition had state sponsors and the regime in Syria had state sponsors. So if you want an extreme case of how to fight under unfavorable conditions and pull a victory, that's a case in point. So that's a very long introduction.
So what was the name of this organization? Can you say it again?
It was so this is the predecessor of ISIS. They did not call themselves ISIS then, and it's sort of a maskirovka operation. So they were called the Nusra Front, Jabhat al-Nusra, but they denied any link with ISI. They were sent by ISI, but they were said, we have no idea. So it was, think little green men in Crimea. We have no connections with Russia, but they were Russian specialists. So that was it.
And mostly they were foreigners.
So they entered Syria. That organization started in Syria in August 2011 with 6 men. 3 of them were not Syrians, and the 3 Syrians were living in Iraq. They were fighting the Americans in Iraq. So they did not have a lot of Syria experience. So that house 6 men, and then fast forward. So this is August 2013. August 2015, they had 50% of Syrian territory. You see the transition? So we'll talk a little bit about that. So this is the code. If you'd like to use it. Actually, also if you go to the Edinburgh University Press, Edinburgh University in the UK, or Oxford University Press in the UK, both of them you can access the book open access in English. So you can download it as PDF or as EPUB. And the same goes for the Ukrainian version. Okay. So very quickly, the structure I'm going to talk. I'm not going to go through the whole presentation because it's a lot of information there. But we're going to make it as a discussion. So I'm going to go very brief and open the floor for you guys to just ask, and I think we'll benefit more if we did it as a discussion. So if you, that's maybe one statistic to highlight. If you looked at the weaker side, especially the non-state side, but weaker side also includes the states that are smaller fighting against the bigger states. You will see a change in historical patterns. If you go to the 19th century, a stronger state fighting a non-state actor or a weaker state would usually win in 90% of the confrontations. That's 19th century. Fast forward to 1975, 1976, the stronger state fighting non-state or a weaker state would only win from 90% to 25%. So 25% only victories for the stronger side. This does not mean that it gets defeated 75%. It means that it needs, at some point, it can get defeated or it needs to negotiate. So it's a draw. So there's no victory there. So that's a change in historical pattern. Usually if you have the larger army, the stronger army, the more resources, the bigger state, you would win. But then that receded from, if you take the cut from 1975 to 2005, and then we extrapolate it to 2020, we find only 20% state victories. So why is that? Well, anyone knows why? Can anyone resolve the puzzle?
A lot of fighting for their freedom.
Part of it is morale, but it's more macro. Because in the 19th century, people were fighting for their freedom as well, but they were still losing. And empires expanded against people who were fighting against their freedom. They still won.
Technologies, proliferation of technologies.
There you go. Petro put the point in the right direction. So, but basically, if you looked at the literature in the military studies, security and military studies, you'll find a lot of explanations. So, some focused on geography. The weaker side would use the geography to fight the stronger side and wear it down. And especially we have more sophisticated theories like lag, for example, loss of accuracy gradient. The more you fight in rugged geography, the stronger side that also has air force will be less accurate in killing the weaker side, and they will kill innocent people. Innocent people, they don't want to be killed, so they will rally for the weaker side. So the weaker side has more resources. There's the LSG, loss of strength gradient. So for example, if you are away from the logistical supply centers, Belarus, Kyiv, and you have very long, extended logistical supply lines, then you're gradually losing strength because you need to transport your logistics to the point of contact, And by doing that, you have an extension of a line that can be attacked, and you're always more vulnerable. So this is loss of strength gradient, and so on. So many geographical explanations in that. Some people were talking about public support. The Cuban case, the Cuban Revolution was a case in point. You have Fidel Castro moved from Santiago de Cuba, in the very far end of the Cuban island, all the way to Havana, with no interceptions. Nobody tried to assassinate him, nobody tried to air interdict him, no artillery, nothing. He moved all the way to Havana, mainly because the population was either apathetic or supportive. So if you have local support, you have a lot of resources. So there's another explanation. And in Havana, there was 10,000 soldiers there. So basically, the soldiers based in Havana were much more than anything Fidel Castro had ever. The entire rebellion of the Cuban Revolution was between 1,000 to 2,000 men. That's the whole thing. Castro, Guevara, Camilo, all those guys were commanding about between 1,000 to 2,000 men. External support, state sponsorship. So when you have allies, they provide resources for you, clearly here. They provide the NLAWs, the javelins, the storm shadows, armor vehicles, and so on, and therefore they keep you in the fight. And this is another explanation. There's a 3 Ps explanation, if anyone knows what's that. The 3 Ps are propaganda, public opinion, politics. So the weaker side, you can be winning militarily. The French in Algeria were winning militarily. But the Algerians were quite clever in creating, in just staying in the fight and doing enough propaganda to affect the French public opinion. The French public opinion was basically affected enough to affect the politicians. And then the politicians decided to leave, even though they were winning militarily. If you want a case here in point, we also, day before yesterday, it was the air raids. And people were asking me why it's very stupid, they're not going to win this way. Yeah, the Russians are not going to win this way, but they are using an air terrorism campaign rather than planting bombs on the land. They're throwing them from the skies on civilian population, on civilian infrastructure, with a lot of propaganda, hoping to affect the public opinion here and make the people pressure the government, even though they're doing well on the military side, but then the socio-political side is not resilient enough, so pressure the government that way. And it's basic logic of this is the strategic logic of terrorism, except this time it's from the air. So here the 3 Ps apply. There are also people who explain how the weaker side win by strategy. So they always argue that if you use an indirect strategy against the stronger side, you will win. So you're likely to win. So use always, if there's a blitzkrieg, again, defense of Kiev. It's a defense in-depth situation where the forces had to retreat, and then be indirect by hitting the flanks and hitting the logistics and making more and more maneuver, mobile defensive warfare as opposed to facing them head-on. Geneva was a different story, but it still worked. It still worked, the direct versus direct. Although they were outnumbered in Geneva 10-1, but still it worked. But there are explanations about the indirect versus direct strategies. And then finally, to the point of the Petro mentioned, this is a fake photo, by the way. So ISIS did not have this is a Tesla cyber truck, and there's a ZU-23 on it. So a very old anti-aircraft system on a very sophisticated cyber truck. But it tells you something. ISIS was one of the first, and I'll show some of the pictures later, one of the first organizations that blended the digital era of warfare, the information era of warfare, with the industrial era. Now we know that they're very important. Ukrainians do that all the time with the apps, to try to locate the military positions, the command posts, with the drones, and the drones giving to the information to the artillery, which is an industrial era weapon system, and that blend is quite successful. And then a series of other, these are more like drone warfare. 2011, ISIS were using it quite, in 2016 in the Battle of Mosul. They almost had, under the Allies and the Americans' air superiority, they had an air superiority under them because they would not fly under 30,000 feet. They were controlling with the drones. They had enough drones to use in various systems, which undermined the Americans' operations in Mosul at one point in 2016. And then this is more like the industrial side, where you have all type of suicide cars, armored and used in a tactical way to pull out, as I mentioned in the beginning, tactical route. So these were some of the very quick explanations. This is very quickly. I'm going to talk about the how I did this basically. So I took about. I didn't want to go too macro, like up in the sky, so I'm able to see what's going on the ground. So if you go macro, international relations always like the structural side, the macro side. I prefer not to do that because basically you will have the macro was important. The mismanagement of politics, the lack of democracy, the corruption, all of that was one of the reasons ISIS was winning. But it will not tell you much about how they fight. If you go to the micro, so if you talk to individuals and hear individual stories, there's a lot of stories, a lot of data, but they won't also tell you what's going on. So I went to the meso level, to the combat unit level, and tried to understand how the combat unit level fights. And then I selected on battles that they had no chance of winning, but then they pulled an upset. So, Battle of Mosul. The organization is outnumbered 10-1, and they're attacking to take the second largest city in Iraq. Ramadi 25-1, and they still took it. So mainly battles that they had no chance of winning, but then they pulled an upset and made it. And this is some of the units that I had to study, about 8 of them. 6 of them provided some support, and then they had to fight against over 80 armed non-state and state actors at one point or another. And how I did this, mainly a bit of field work, some 58 semi-structured interviews, including 31 with people who fought against ISIS at one point or another, so engaged them. And some of the sources in the material that was published by the organization. So you have the story of the organization, the official story, narrative, and then also the story of the allies, of the operations that were done by the Americans, by the Brits, by the Canadians, and others, and then collected all that in a
I'm sorry, you said it was illegal for you to conduct interviews with ISIS, right? But then you mentioned that there were. No, these were people. I did not introduce ISIS. 31. Yeah, 31 interviews directly engage ISIS. So these are people who fought, who were in contact with ISIS. Yeah, they were not from ISIS. The only interviews I got from ISIS are these, are in the publications. Okay. So this is the published materials that were already out there. So it was fine. So this is some of the caveats. I have a lot of numbers in the book. So the numbers is just an indicator of the capabilities of the organization. It's not absolute correct, in a way. So just for example, ISIS claimed that it did 482 suicide vehicle-borne IEDs attacks in a 10-month period in the Battle of Mosul.
It's a long battle. They trying to defend it, but they lost it in the end. But when I saw officers, American officers, who were saying no, they did more than 600 in 2 months only. So that number is much lower. And you realize there that there is a part of the propaganda. You know, many of these operations were failed operations. Only 1 person or 2 person was killed. So they want to inflate the number of victims. So they go lower on the operations and then higher on the number of victims. So then for each operation you'll find 10 or 20 soldiers killed. So part of the propaganda. So the issue here is numbers are not that important. There is no other non-state actor that could pull up 482 suicide attacks in a 10 months period with vehicles and use basically an urban terrorism weapon in conventional warfare. They turned that around. So in that sense, it was a bit of a caveat that I had to mention. This is briefly on I think I mentioned this before, the organization came out of nowhere. In Iraq, it was almost destroyed in 2010. By 2014, they were controlling the second largest city in the state of Iraq. In Syria, I mentioned, started with 6 men in 2011, and then by 30 men in August 2011, and then at one point in 2013 to 2014, they were controlling half of Syria, basically. Then with other also presence in somewhere. Overall, they controlled 120 towns, cities, and villages between the southern Philippines all the way to Western Africa. So this is some on the decapitation of their soldiers, so I'm not going to go too much into it. I think I need to go a bit into the discussion, but I'll mention 3 or 4 more slides. One on the tactical level. So this was the level of, if you want to relate the tactical innovations, so how they upgrade weapon systems and then using them in ways that people are surprised by them. That's on one end, and this is the combat impact of that system. So most dangerous was the SVIBs, because think of them as cruise missiles or land-based torpedoes that are armored. So stopping them is difficult, but they can breach most of the obstacles that are put against them because they're armored as well. So hitting them, they're going quite fast. Hitting them, usually it will need very accurate artillery, maybe 120 millimeters or over, or a sophisticated ATGMs like anti-tank guided weapons. But not. Sometimes I saw some of those who took at least 2 to 3 RPG-7s, and they continue. They continue on the. Nothing happened to the vehicle. But the most innovative, and this was, remember, this is 2011. We're talking about 2011, 2012. So it was 10 years ago. So things were relatively. The iPad guided mortars. So you set up the mortar, you set up the iPad, and you have a spotter who may or may not be with you in the country. So you have a spotter actually sitting in a cafe in Holland, using Google Earth, the upgraded system, and he just put a pin on that Google Earth, and that pin will show up on that iPad, and they can adjust the calibrated and then use it in a more accurate. So they need 1 or 2 ranging shots only. After that, the shot will come more accurate. So it's an old system, but back then it was still innovative. For a group that, and then the tele-operated sniper rifles. So they defended buildings where there was no one in the building, basically. Just the rifles, and they are tele-operated. Not very dangerous in terms of combat effectiveness or combat impact, but quite innovative. And a few other bits and pieces there. Some of them are explained in detail in the book. How they. So this is the one I was talking about. So that's the tactic, basically. So that was the target. The this is not in Aleppo, because Aleppo was not captured in details, but that was in Ramadi, in Iraq. So this is the command post. Here are the obstacles. If any of you went to the infantry school, you will be familiar, or Western infantry schools, so SOSRA, suppress, that's the breaching sequence, how to breach an obstacle. So suppress, obscure, secure, reduce, assault. So here they did that exactly, but with ways that we did not even imagine in Western military academia. So they suppressed, so there were snipers here, and snipers there. So they were trying to suppress here. And then they obscured. They obscured, usually when you obscure with smoke. So you make the enemy blind on where are you going to attack. So they were obscuring, but they were obscuring with a vehicle that was there, and it was very loud. So if you're a soldier here, and there's sniping, so you're trying to cover, but you're hitting a vehicle, so the vehicle is more dangerous than the sniper. Because the vehicle is a 5 to 7 ton vehicle that's going to blow up, so it's more dangerous. So all your eyes are here, okay? But the actual vehicle was here. So that was the obscuring. And then securing, so this area was almost secured. That tractor here knocked out 2 of these and created, after that it moved inside, it blew up, so it also created an obstacle here. 5 cars, same technique, 5 cars entered to clear up the way, all the way there, and then after that, the 7-ton truck blew up the building. It was quite soldier. Also, 3 to 5 minutes, the whole thing. So very briefly, some of the findings. So we're talking here basically about a group that has some unique features and some not so unique features. So the unique features, the not so unique features, first, you will find that the moral force was high. So psychological, first, most of the fighters were motivated for ideological reasons. And most of them had the ability to use psychological warfare against their enemies. So their enemies were usually scared of them, especially scared to be captured because they think of Wagner. If you're captured there, it's a big issue. So many of the fighters, especially in places like Mosul and Raqqa, did not want to fight, based on that reputation of brutality. But also that group had a very good unit cohesion. If they decided to retreat, they retreat together. They decided to advance, they advance together. They back up each other quite well. And if they decide to surrender, they surrender together as a unit. So it gives you more leverage to negotiate your surrender. So the unit cohesion level was quite high. Most of them were autonomous. They can rely on themselves for months. They had this saying, whenever it's truce time, so things are calm, bury the TNT, bury your explosives, and just bring dollars. So they can finance themselves for a longer period. So they don't need to go back to the command or the higher echelons in the forces. So they can stay autonomous even if they're at the size of a section or even a platoon at some point. Also, many of them had trans-regional combat experiences. So you had fighters joining them from the Caribbean and from Indonesia and Southeast Asia. So there was a lot of combat experience there. The hierarchy was very flexible. So if you hold a higher rank, you can do a private role. If you are a governor of a town, but the military commander has more experience than you just go under him. So the hierarchies were very flexible during combat time. And then there was a very interesting, and that is the first time I see it studying multiple armed groups. There is an obsession with specialization. If you're a sniper, you stay a sniper for a long time, for the entire, until you die, basically. If you're a mortarman, you stay like that, and you progress. Rather than taking, folks if you're a specialist in an area, let's say Raqqa in Syria, if you're a specialist in Raqqa, if you know the tribes, if you know the groups, if you have connections there, you stay there. You stay there and you do mainly intelligence work. So there's a lot of specialization folks. But all of this, believe it or not, is not unique. It's helpful, but not unique to them. What was unique is more like this is the conclusion of the book. I was arguing that they have three very unique characteristics that give them the edge. One of them is their operational art. So they had a very clear modus operandi. And this will link a lot to what Russia did in Crimea in 2014. They had a very clear modus operandi on how to enter a town, enter a city, map it out, clear we used to call it skulls, so soften and creep, soften the resistance in that town by assassination, kidnapping, ransoms, blowing up the enemy, and then creep on it, enter it, disperse in it, and then after that lead, skulls, and then coalition build first. If you have allies, civilian front organizations that are not really civilian, people in the military or the security forces that you can flip them to your side or bribe them. So more or less sounds familiar, huh? So the coalition build, and then after that liquidate whoever is left and consolidate your power. And it was a very clear modus operandi that was multiple times done in towns and cities. But also you have some other parts of the operation art. It's all in the book because I took a lot of time. Also, the other thing that is important, there was strategic shifts. That was an organization that can take all of its resources after a conventional fight and then reduce it to a guerrilla fight. So go back. We're not holding, from holding territory, defending it, to reducing everything to we're not holding territory anymore. We're just going to harass the enemy, attack from the flanks, attack from the rear, and we stay secret and we don't hold the territory. Sometimes they hold the territory just for 24 to 48 hours. Why? They will enter, they will take all the resources possible, eliminate whoever is there, and then disappear after that, disperse. Then they had, believe it or not, they published it. Like how to temporarily hold territory and why is this important. So that was another bit, the strategic shifts from conventional to guerrilla. From guerrilla, if you're losing at guerrilla, you go to terrorism. So secretive, small cells, so on. And then if you need, you upgrade. You go from terrorism to guerrilla to conventional. And then series of tactical innovations, like 15 categories of them. I also explain them in the book. So that was the article that I published with some of the Ukrainian media here, thanks to Alexei. The idea there is there was a lot of intersection between that way of warfare and what the Russians did in 2014, 2015, and now, 2022, 2023. Why? One, the extensive usages of IEDs, of improvised explosive devices, in retrogrades to cover the retreats, to cover their advances, to terrorize the population. Second, the what I call in the book, the Alter, it's an acronym. So you need intelligence. So you need to enter a town and figure out who's with me, who's against me. So you need to, A stands for absorb. You need to absorb those who are for you, those who are going to sympathize with you, or you bribe them. If they're interested in money, you bribe them. And after that, you need to lead. So, I alter, lead. And leadership is basically what the Russians did in Crimea, was classic agent in charge. You have like a group of agents and in Donbass who infiltrated. And now they have the authority to kill, they have the authority to bribe, they have the authority to talk to the the former servicemen and tell them, oh, okay, maybe they're going to be prosecuted because you killed protesters here in Maidan. So, it's better for you to come with us. Here's $2,000 a month and set it aside. ISIS did the same thing in Iraq. Nothing special to do. So lead. And then also loot. So if you have air defense assets in Crimea or air defense assets in Raqqa, you loot them. These are like state assets or naval assets. You take them. You take them to your side. This is how ISIS basically built its conventional arms, mainly by looting. And Russia as well, in Crimea, mainly by looting as well. And then you transfer. The transfer of knowledge. You need to get all this intelligence knowledge and all this tactical knowledge, and you transfer them. MH17, if you remember, the book system. Who taught miners to use a book system? It was Russian-led forces. So you transfer the knowledge, but you're not sure about the consequences of that. They can mess up like MH17. And then the final one, the R stands for recruitment, basically. So you recruit the locals and try to draft them and mobilize them to fight for your cause. So it sounds familiar, huh? And the same thing with the scouts. I mentioned soft and creep and so on. But also there is more. There's more that was very clear in 2022. ISIS used sexual violence as a weapon of war. So weaponized rape. Did the same. Russians did the same way, unfortunately. There's an abuse of religion. So you try to use religion rather than to make peace and to make more harmony and to provide spiritual service. You're actually using rape, you're using religion to promote aggression and to mobilize people against other people. Whether you're using a church or the mosque, whether it's in Moscow or in Grozny. You're trying to do this as much as... So abusing religion basically for very nefarious and evil purposes. ISIS did the same thing. It built a whole ideology based on a very wrong interpretation of a religion and used it in a very successful way in terms of psychological warfare and motivational warfare. And then you have, obviously, I mentioned a few other propaganda pieces. The most infamous of them was the RIA Novosti article that was basically framing the whole people as targets, and the only way to defeat them is by deleting their identity, because otherwise their identity is equivalent to Nazism and so on. ISIS did the same thing in terms of its propaganda, but it did not do it at a state level. Russia did it at a state level, at Ukraine level. They did it on towns and villages level. So they would mark a village as everybody there needs to be. You either change your identity or be wiped out. So you'll find a few comparisons there. It's a study that will be coming as well. This is the short version of it. And I mentioned some of it in the prologue of the book in Ukrainian. So thank you again, Irina, for the translation. But there's a longer study that I'm happy to send to Alexei, and he can share with you all after that. The longer piece on state terrorism in Ukraine.
So it's done.
There's one that the short piece, and then there's the longer one is coming out. It wasn't published yet. And this is basically part of it. One is the commentary on the first article, and the second is on I think that was on the tanks, on Western tanks. I'm going to stop here now. I mentioned most of this. So why do you fight like that? If you're Russia has a lot more capabilities than ISIS. Okay, but why do you fight like that? Because sometimes, if you're a dragon, it's a lot less costlier to fight like a snake. In Crimea, Russia did not lose any soldiers. If I remember correctly, 0, because they fought like a snake. They infiltrated, they flipped people around, bribed people, kidnapped, so on. In the Donbass, they lost some because they fought halfway. Already Ukraine adapted and was pushing back, and so they had to fight conventionally. But when they attacked conventionally totally, because the hybrid element failed, they lost. Now the estimate is, so the entire force that attacked Ukraine on 24th of February 2022 is almost wiped out. Because they attacked with 150 to 200,000, and now the estimates is 150 to 200,000 between dead, wounded, missing, or POWs. So basically, we're fighting now a new army in many ways, a new army of mobilized militias, and also some survived, but you see the difference between the cost: 0 casualties and taking or occupying the most important geostrategic region of the country at 0 costs, ISIS way, and then conventional way, 150,000 to 100,000, and you're a pariah now in the international scene. And so, possibility of a strategic defeat is highly likely. So that's why they use it. The military effectiveness multiplier, achieve strategic goals. You can always deny. You say I'm not there, like it happened, just to like you get the victory. You get the victory and tell everybody I'm not there, so no need to intervene. I'm not there. So, but I take the victory, and now I need to secure the victory. So I use the muscles. I do the amphibious assault and the air assault that happened in Crimea in 2014, just to secure the victory. Not to get it, to secure it. So the troops are there to secure the fight, not the fight. But you won by the snake tactics. And finally, it's a model like one of the ISIS leaders were very, very famous for that. He was killed in Tadrifat in Syria by mainly Syrian opposition forces. And his name was Haji Bakr, so that I used to call this the Haji Bakr model. But now it's an Igor Gurkin model in a way afterwards. So that's our famous FSB colonel who was currently a Kremlin pariah, wanted by Wagner, and also a failed Mobbing. So it's a long story. So I'm going to stop here now. This is, if you'd like, on Edinburgh and Oxford University website. That's open access, so you can get it by just click the English version, PDF and EPUB. And this is on, you already had scanned that one. And that's it, and this is my contacts if you need any more questions and want to stay in touch, please feel free to do so. And now we open up for discussion. Yes, sorry about that. No, it took more time than I should have.
I will now moderate a summary, even though I took a couple of pages comments, which is very insightful and interesting. But I do see there is a hand from Bogdan from that. Maybe we can do it collective. If there are other questions already, we can collect a round of questions, if possible. Yes? Bogdan, please.
Maybe some specific question about military communication and connection. We have a radio station, it's like Kaytara, difference ideal and Russia. Maybe Russia will have something elements in communication inside army, inside between battalion, brigade, division, like in war bands of ISIS. Maybe
Look, ISIS was a lot weaker than Russia in terms of communication. They had 2 or 3 frequencies. And they part of it, what they were doing, they were using old school, sometimes phone lines, sometimes communication with motorcycles, and so on. But part of the reason many of their, so they would be coordinated, they were doing combined arms in a way. So you would have the drone clearing the way, looking for obstacles, but it's connected with the suicide car down there, and it's giving him directions. Like here it's blocked, here it's open, so he would swerve and go like that. These communications were, because they had only 2 or 3 frequencies, they were intercepted by the US forces, and there was a lot of jamming, electronic warfare going on. In your case, I think you have much more options, and you're doing a lot better in terms of securing communications and in terms of operational security than the Russians, because the amount of interceptions that happened, including phone calls between soldiers and their families and soldiers and their commanders. And this is not just in 2022, 2023, it was in 2014. 2014 there was a whole interception of one of the Russian commanders they were going, I think, in the direction of Dnipro, and they called their commanders and said, okay, they're putting up a fight, we can't continue, but it will be a bloodbath. And then his commander was saying, okay, they'll go back. So in terms of operational security, I think they're doing worse. But it's a process of adaptation. So changes, you do the mistake, you lose some people, you fix it so you don't lose more people. And it's the same way. Now they're adapting as well, I have to say. It's unfortunate.
Professor, it's clarification from Professor.
Yes.
Okay. So please, because a lot of students and myself included, they do not follow the events very closely in the Middle East. So can you please summarize? Because you said that ISIS tactics was quite effective, right? That they were militarily destroyed, but then they re-emerged. So what happened at the end of the day? What is the
Result. Outcome.
net result?
The net result.
Yeah.
Okay, the net result, this is a great question. The net result is a strategic defeat, which hopefully Russia will face as well, because they're using the same tactics. The net result was a strategic defeat, but it was for a reason, a strategic defeat. They pulled up a victory, and they could not, which was impossible, and they could not secure it. If you need to pull up this victory, you need to be able to negotiate. ISIS had no way of negotiation, and no friends whatsoever, no allies, including groups that are very close to it, like Al-Qaeda, for example, in terms of ideological affiliation. Al-Qaeda is another terrorist group in the Middle East, including the groups like the Taliban. They are at war with the Taliban as well. So they're at war with everybody. If you're at war with everybody, including groups that are very close to you, then you cannot secure the victory. You're getting attacks from all sides. This is, in the end, that was their ultimate defeat, because these tactics, it's still tactics. It's not a strategy to secure your victories. You pulled the victory, but you failed to secure it. And in the end, they still exist. They still exist in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Sinai of Egypt, North Sinai, but to a much lesser degree. They were destroyed before, they re-emerged again. I don't know if they will re-emerge again or not, but these tactics are transferable. You can always transfer them and then work on your strategy to secure your victory next time.
Why they couldn't be friends with Al-Qaeda if they ideologically close?
It's mainly because the leadership was too much believing in their own ideology, and that the ideology is against compromise. They would see any compromise as a betrayal. So a very inflexible leadership, and ended its demise.
So if they are more flexible, they could secure strategic victory?
It's a possibility. The Taliban were flexible, and they secured Afghanistan in the end against a coalition of. So it was a possibility. It was a possibility, but luckily they didn't. They weren't flexible, and they destroyed it in the end.
Okay. About flexible groups, yeah, and you said about the Taliban. I heard the Taliban made a fatwa about exporting the heroin, and how can possibly the Islamic State be an ally to that organization. And another one, because as I read a lot of interviews with maybe you read with Bukadada, maybe you heard about that person, Christian Amda. He saw that nobody, no state, no actor couldn't even be closer to the, how they say, Islam, and how these actors can be at all allies to the ISIS.
Okay, so the Taliban and ISIS are not friends. They're enemies, right? They've been fighting for a long time. the Taliban on the issue of drugs, it's more flexible. That's it, because they don't do it, but they tax it, and there's a certain procedure, where they do it. But the relationship with ISIS was very difficult from the beginning, mainly because they see each other as enemies as opposed to anything else. The ideology is also a bit different. There are differences in the ideology. I don't know if this answers your question, but I'm not sure why you're asking me why they're not friends, or
No, how could they become friends?
they won't be friends. They are at war. Taliban, when they took Afghanistan, they will go to prison, and they will release everybody, including people from the Afghan government. They will tell them, listen, you can work with us, you can join us, but they will put ISIS leaders on the side and they will execute them.
Thus, there is no possibility of making an alliance with ISIS.
I think for the Taliban, it's a no-no. It's one of the.
So again, why? Because they.
I support the question because from your exchange, I heard 3 times that Taliban and ISIS no way friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe because you mentioned
And ISIS and Al
They
Qaeda
have difference in
also no
ideology.
friends. Yeah.
maybe a bit of ideology. What are the main differences?
Okay.
What makes them hate each other?
Because logically, they would win if they combine forces, right?
Yes.
So why they don't do it?
But the irrationality is very high. Okay. So the issues has to do primarily, I think, the ideology is not too far. Okay. Main issues has to do with leadership, who's leading, and then there was blood. There was assassination on one side. ISIS usually starts with the killing, and then the others respond. So there's a whole series of events that are historical that led to that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And also ISIS is less compromising than the Taliban specific. So Taliban said with the Americans, they negotiated, they made and this is like a no-no for ISIS.
And violate. And violate.
Yeah, it's a major violation. They used to call the Mullah Bradar. He's one of the leaders of the Taliban who signed the agreement with the Americans in Doha. So I don't know if you guys can hear me still. When I dip, just raise your hand so I can raise my voice. So Mullah Bradar, that was one of the leaders of the Taliban who signed the agreement in Doha with the Americans, and they used to make fun of him and call him Mullah Bradley. The Bradley cars, the armored vehicles. We got some of them. So they used to. So it's this type, like you're basically an American pawn. You're manufactured like the Bradleys by America. So although the Bradley is called by under the General Omar Bradley, who was a very skillful World War II general, so it's actually an honor for Bradar. His military skills are not that high, so it's something good actually.
Okay.
But the relationship is really bad. And basically lots of bloodshed. Blood matters, and ISIS killed from them quite a few. They replied back. There was a very funny. It's funny tragedy in Afghanistan. At one point, that was the Afghan government is there, okay, with a lot of American support and with U.S. transport Black Hawks, so U.S. tactical transport helicopters. And then there was a fight in the north. Can't remember what I think. Maybe somewhere in the north of Afghanistan. Between Taliban and ISIS, okay? And Taliban was winning. They besieged them. So ISIS now, if we surrender to the Taliban, they're going to take us prisoners. They're probably going to kill us. So who to call? Kabul, the Afghan government. So they called the Afghan government and told them, "Hey, the Taliban is besieging us. If you take us, we can go on public TV and smear them and say, they are Pakistani spies and so on." So the government said, "Sure, okay, we'll come to it." So you have these American helicopters, Black Hawk helicopters, picking up ISIS in Afghanistan so that the Taliban doesn't capture them. And then they took them to Kabul and they did interviews with them. in government to basically say that the Taliban are bad people, and so they use this as propaganda. You know, so that's how bad. You know, so we prefer the Americans than the Taliban. This is ISIS. So, any yes,
so
please.
Both you and I have a military background, yes, and we realize that each soldier he need to have some type of training, yes. What is a part of is ISIS soldier in relation of recruiting, and after that became a warrior? What type of training they have? How long is it for them?
It's that's a great question. Thank you. It's one of the most fascinating elements I found about this organization, because usually, so I have it in the book under transfer of knowledge. They did not spare any effort in terms of training and teaching. So the minute you enter the organization, they have like 3 or 4 levels of training, from the beginner all the way to the advanced. And then after the advanced, you have specialization. But not just that, the amount of videos, written material, doctrine, if you wish, or parts of doctrine, not a whole doctrine, but part of doctrine, on how things should be done. They published them, disseminated them, but not just for the members, but for the public. Like you could access them, you know, on the internet. All kind of, from breaching tactics to sniping tactics, to IEDs manufacturing, to mine laying, to how to destroy an armored vehicle, to how to destroy a tank. So they were disseminating all kind of knowledge. And interestingly, if you looked at some of the official armies in the Middle East, the Brigade A would not give Brigade B some of those tactics, because they don't want Brigade B to be better than them. Whereas this organization was like to just disseminate as much as possible, and whoever grabs it, great. And whoever grabs it, and also there was a cult of meritocracy in a way. So you would have people who were not educated, for example, no higher education, but then they proved to be very skillful in grasping military knowledge. So they would promote them to higher ranks. At one point, you had a Georgian guy from Georgia, Omar Ashour. He was like a Georgian Kist, so from Chechen origins. And he was just a sergeant, I think, in the Georgian military intelligence at one point. And he became a sergeant. They had recruited colonels and higher officers, but he was the leader. They promoted him to be probably the most advanced military commander in ISIS. So there was this cult of meritocracy going on, but a lot of training and support system that they had. And they were also making makeshift camps wherever they have an area. The first idea is a makeshift camp. Get the shooting range, get the people, get the instructors, and arrange it quite quickly. So I think that contributed to that level of skill in a short period of time. And I think they learned this from the Americans. They translated many of the US doctrine material on all levels. So they were translated to Arabic or other languages they speak.
So thank you, Omar. And so my question is about our war, what is ongoing. So as you showed, these tactics, they are neutral. They can be used both by our enemies and by us. So as you know, our enemy has several centers of gravity. So one of this, it's personal security of Putin and his entourage. The second is nuclear nuclear weapons and the means of delivery, like this nuclear triad. And Ukraine sometimes tried to attack these centers of gravity, both Putin and the means of delivery. The tactical bombers, but also and a fleet, of course, the Russian fleet. But also our authorities are trying to look for the. So what they're trying to do is to try to destabilize Russia from inside. And they try to support the Russian forces train them, empower them, give them weapons, including even the Western weapons, and then try to help them to make incursions into the Russian territory. So what do you think from your point of view when you started to, because these are also non-state actors. So these are Russians, they are armed, but they are non-state actors, and they are from Russia. So what do you think, I'm just interested in your point of view, as a professional expert, could these tactics bring fruits? And what our government should not do in order not to become a rogue, yes, in the eyes of the allies. So what are, in your experience, is it possible? Then it's inefficient, and what red lines should not be crossed for us not to lose more than we win by using the same tactic or a kind of tactics inside Russia?
So thank you. That's also a fascinating question. So on all sides here, so that part is I called it in the book militia management. You know, how to manage a group of armed non-state actors and and it's in the U.S. doctrine, it's irregular warfare, right? So the U.S. for the first time published a brief on, not the whole doctrine, but a brief on the importance of irregular warfare and that they will be using. Number one in the world in terms of irregular warfare is Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran, because Iran is one of the states, one of the few states that decided to have a veto power in other countries by empowering non-state actors there. The prime example is Hezbollah, in Lebanon and later on in Syria. But also other examples of Houthis in Yemen and others. So form alliances not with the governments. They have alliance with the government, but your real power is the non-state actor who's armed, who's trained, who has a political impact in the country. Okay. The Russians did that as well. So the Russians, any of you familiar with the term Sahwat, Iraqi Sahwat? You know, these were tribal militias that the US used to fight Al-Qaeda in Iraq. But then they tried to integrate them, the US being the US, state building and control of the armed forces and so on. They tried to reintegrate them into the Iraqi armed forces. So Russia did something very similar. The Sahwat, which is Kadyrov basically, they flipped them, so now they're fighting for Russia, and then they took them and transported them in another country, which is Ukraine. So they are learning in terms of that type of militia management. The LNR forces, in quotations, the DNR forces, so the so-called First Corps and Second Corps, these are all militias that they created. So currently, actually, the army is full of militias, including the Wagner group, so irregulars that they are using to extend their powers outside. So it's a very effective tactic. And in many ways, I think it's the three main pillars, if you wish, is one, the leadership of that organization needs to be loyal. The degree of closeness, because with Iran, it's an ideological firm alliance with Hezbollah. The Wagner group is money, basically, money and resources. It's not an ideological alliance. So it depends on what are the big. So that alliance is there's a range in it. How close you are to that group and how far you are. You have also, so the leadership is important. How loyal is that leadership? On what basis it's loyal? How much control can you have over it? Second thing is their capabilities. How capable are they? How good are they? And third thing, you have to have this understanding of what is exactly the role, until where you want to use them, or not use them, until where you want to form an alliance with them to achieve what. And then fourth is, after that, if things fail, how are you going to deal with them if things fail? Because, for example, the two failure cases are the Contras in Nicaragua for the US, and the Israelis had the South Lebanese army, Lahad army. These were two failed cases, mainly because the mission was unclear, the capabilities was not high, so they were not that well trained. The control of the leadership was, in both cases actually, the contrast was a bit murky, but the Lahad army, the South Lebanese army, they were controlled by the neck. The Israelis were like, the funding, the training, the money, the everything, so that in the end, the too much centralization led to the collapse in the end. So these issues need to be aware with, and then you see their effectiveness. You need to assess them and reassess them, in terms of the smaller missions to the higher missions. But yes, everybody does it. Everybody. Iran, Cuba, the US, Israel, you name it, everybody does it. It's a very effective way to fight. But also there are caveats that need to be checked.
Other questions, comments?
So about the similarities of tactics of the Russian Federation and ISIS, about the publication of extreme violence. ISIS was made an official tactic and publication of the executions, as you know, for instance, decapitation of Nick Burke by the Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the person who, as I know, created the ISIS. But there are a lot of videos how Russians did the same. For instance, decapitation by the Wagner soldiers of the Syrian soldier. For instance, decapitating of the Ukrainian soldier, etc. Is that a coincidence, or just the Russia tries to integrate the same tactic to to terrorize the Ukrainian soldiers?
So I think it's more of the latter. It's not a coincidence. I think it's psychological terrorism, basically, and to make sure that they demoralize the soldiers, and also they do this. They videotape it. If you videotape it, it's not a coincidence, right? You want to make a statement that we're actually going to behead soldiers. Which is a very illegal thing to do. It's a war crime, but still they want to do it because you're hoping to have the psychological impact of it. This is one intersection. Thank you for reminding me. This is one intersection I forgot to mention about the connection between Russian way of warfare and ISIS way of warfare. There's an intersection there as well.
It's not an easy question, but it's about Ukraine. What do you think that Ukraine needs to do to win this war, either conventional or non-conventional? And what are the main hurdles for a victory or delayed victory?
I'll leave that question for the Ukrainian chief of staff, for General Zaluzhny, and I'm not going to.
Don't become like Ukrainian student. Don't do that.
I think she will win. I'm not going to talk the details, but I think Ukraine will win. She will have a strategic victory in the end. So that's all I can say. Slava Ukraine.
Yeah.
I would like also to thank you for your work. It's really interesting, and it's really helpful for Ukraine now, because this comparison that you did between Russia and ISIS for international audience in English can be really helpful for other countries to understand what Russia really is. Because for us, there is nothing new in those their tactics regarding this control over the territory and population, those mass executions, rapings, terror, kidnapping, etc. Because when it started in 2014, everybody was thinking, again. So like Bolsheviks came 100 years ago. And we see the same. And this topic of historical experience is more close to Ukraine, and everyone, majority of people would compare it with here in Ukraine with our historical experience with the Bolsheviks, and I think it looks like it resemble all these Russian actions resemble their tactics that they did before. But what you do, it helps international community understand and treat Russia the way it should be, because no one perceives ISIS as real state. They are just religious fanatics that do crimes, and they should be punished for it. And the same attitude should be towards Russia, but Russia has its propaganda capabilities, soft power that ISIS didn't have. So I just want to thank you for your work, because it's really important. And following this question, how we should win this war, we need more weapons, but also we need the work that you does. And thank you.
My honor and pleasure. But just one reminder: weapons don't fight on their own.
Of course.
And there is no magic weapon. So don't think that there is a magic weapon that, unless if you have nukes, that's a different story. But below nukes, it's the soldier, it's the unit, it's the commander, it's the strategy, it's the people, and you have a people's army. But I was, in terms of winning this war, I heard about the babushkas in Roveri, giving the location of the Russian forces to the artillery units. Despite her house and the street is about 100 meters away. So actually, the artillery could be not that accurate. She still gave the position, and she still asked to. So when you have a level like this of a real people's army, from the 18 years old to the babushka, it's then it's much more important than any weapon system you have.
Yes, Professor. Omar, you are a great friend of Ukraine. You have wonderful Sri You understand Ukraine. You write about our war. But we know that in the Arab world there are a lot of pro-Russian views. It's really difficult sometimes either to explain in the Arab countries what is the position of Ukraine, or there is, we see it on many Arab channels, kind of neutrality. You have Russian speaker, you have Ukrainian speaker, please debate between yourselves. So what Ukraine should do in order to be understood in the Arab world, in order to have more Omar Ashurs on our side?
I think you're already doing it, but the thing is, you need more intensity, more visits, more cooperation, more exchanges. I was just talking maximum about possible exchanges, because we have a graduate school there. So I think what's happening is, and also more propaganda debunking. What's happening is that Russia is claiming the legacy of the Soviet Union,
Right.
Okay, which is not true, because Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, and in many ways Ukraine was many of the liberation. I gave you one example from uncles that I know who were trained by Ukrainian army officers, not Russian Ukrainian. They were part of the Soviet Union, but they were Ukrainians. So that legacy of liberation in the Arab world is very much Ukraine contributed to it as much as Russia, if not more. The other thing is there is a language that maybe the people in the Middle East would understand well. If you talked about the four buzzwords: occupation, war of liberation, colonial settlement, and forced deportation. From choose your country, from Iraq to Morocco, they would understand these without any
and this is what Ukraine is going through. There is occupation, the war of liberation going on. There is forced deportation of people from the east and from the south, and from Crimea and from the Donbass and elsewhere. And there is colonial settlements. They're basically resettling people in Ukrainian territory. Those they get, and those hit specific nerves in the Middle East. But you need more presence. I mean, now the MFA, I think it's Mr. Maxim Truk is a special envoy to the.
Is he okay?
I met him once, to be honest. I'm not gonna. I met him once only, but you need more. That's the issue. I think you need more. So the work that you're doing on the global south, this is excellent. And
This just
it's just you have to start somewhere. It's a good start. You have to start somewhere. You need more, but the other issue is that it needs also. I think I will advise more people to come to Ukraine at this point, because they when they come here, they will and sit under the air raids and see the skies lightning in the middle of and understand what is really air terrorism. Because I am using this term specifically because terrorism is understood as well in the Middle East and its impact on people. The perspective will change. It will change eventually, because actually you are victimized, you were assaulted, you were ambushed, and you have every right to tell this story to the people of the world in general, and the Middle East in particular, because there are many intersections there. It's just the Russian propaganda that makes it less visible, but in the end it will be visible.
Що ж, цей епізод подкасту вийшов трошки довшим, ніж наші звичні епізоди, але ми дуже сподіваємось, що ви знайшли для себе користь від лекції професора Омара Ашура. Також маємо зазначити, що його працю «Як воює іділ» можна почитати й українською мовою. Український переклад виходить у вільному безоплатному доступі вже цього місяця в рамках серії українських перекладів вільного доступу бостонського видавництва Academic Studies Press. А я нагадую, що це був подкаст DIF Dive від фонду «Демократичні ініціативи». Послухати нас ви можете на стрімінгових платформах Spotify та Google Podcast. Вся інформація про проєкт розміщена також на нашому сайті та у соцмережах Демініціатив. Цей матеріал підготувала комунікаційниця демократичних ініціатив Ксенія Кутова. На все добре, бувайте!